Time to blow your mind with historical homos.
Virginia Woolf to Vita Sackville-West, January 1927. Look here, Vita. Throw over your man, and we'll go to Hampton Court, and dine on the river together, and walk in the garden in the moonlight, and come home late and have a bottle of wine and get tipsy. And I'll tell you all the things I have in my head, millions, myriads. They won't stir by day, only by dark on the river. Think of that. Throw over your man, I say, and come.
Amazing.
3 years into their passionate affair, Virginia Woolf wrote this letter to one of the loves of her life, Vita Sackville-West, a dashing socialite and a brilliant author in her own right. The affair wouldn't last past the end of the Roaring Twenties, but it was one of the great loves of Virginia's life. And yet, despite her intense love for this woman, Virginia is rarely remembered as a queer figure. But that stops today. So come on in, babies, because the water's human temperature.
So let's go back in time and take another rewrite through our history. Celebrate ourselves tonight and cover all the things that's still a mystery. 'Cause if you think you know, you don't know, around the world we go, 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 go. Time to blow your mind with historical homos, historical homos, historical homos.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Historical Homos. I'm Donal Brophy.
And I'm Bash. Welcome back.
Today, we will be talking about a much beloved historical and literary figure, and somebody that I happen to admire a great deal, the one and only Miss Virginia Woolf. And yes, today's episode is about women loving women. And you know why? Because they're just so fucking good at it, Bash.
They are. And I just want to be clear that this is a lesbian podcast. We are pro-lesbian. We love lesbian. I hate the whole gay versus lesbian thing. I think it's so fucking stupid.
I didn't even know it existed. And
No,
that's
you know how it's like, you
unaware
know how
I
it's
am.
like in the Will and Grace era of homosexuality, it's like gay men versus lesbian women. It's like, shut up.
Yeah.
Lesbians are awesome. Love them.
Absolutely. And speaking of fucking awesome lesbians, Miss Virginia Woolf. Okay. Gay at the turn of the 20th century in Blighty, in old England.
I've never even heard that before.
You never heard Blighty described?
Blighty?
It's like a slang term for England. Old Blighty. Yeah.
You are useful after
It's
all.
just, yeah. Je suis Donal Brophy. Sorry, go on.
It's important that we give a little bit of context, I think, around what it was like to be gay at this time. It is post-Victorian England, which is disgusting, yucky, we hate. They're so prude. They don't talk about sex. They don't even really talk about love that much. You know, they just don't have the sort of juices flowing. And post-Oscar Wilde, they are definitely on high alert for the homos, right? Especially for the men. So Oscar Wilde famously has this big trial where he gets convicted, and it doesn't end well for him. But at the same time, everyone in England knows that everyone in England is a little bit gay. That's one of their national pastimes. And so they're not surprised that these intense relationships exist between men or between women. But for the Victorians, they're a little bit like, oh, it's just a phase, you know, kind of like they still are for a lot of women, you know, when they're sort of like, oh, she's just bisexual for a while, or it's a
One stop on the highway to
one stop on the highway to
gay,
gay.
especially amongst like kind of the upper classes, right? The upper echelons. I mean,
Yeah, and the upper classes, as always, can do whatever they want with relative impunity.
but everybody would always kind of button it up after a certain amount of time and marry a woman.
Yes,
and,
especially in this period. And that's important because of what Virginia Woolf and her whole set will represent. So they do talk about lesbianism as a thing. Virginia often refers to it as sapphism, which is from...
Sapphism. Do we know where that came from?
Yeah, from Sappho, who is the OG lesbian, the poetess of ancient Greece. I named my dog after her.
Oh, I thought you named her after Sapphi from Ab Fab.
I also did that.
Yeah.
Oh, you little bitch troll from hell.
So in 1921, importantly, and also there are like some fabulous lesbians running around the place, you know, in Paris, in particular, there are all these circles like Gertrude Stein and
Right,
Alice
yeah.
Toklas and Natalie Clifford Barney. There's like these rich American...
So it's the Belle Epoque in Paris, right?
Belle Epoque Paris.
So they're a little bit more kind of chill and down with the good times.
Well, yeah, in Paris, everyone's been fucking everyone for
Yeah.
hundreds of years. They don't care. In England, they're starting to change, but it's still very Victorian, very prudish. So, and actually, within Virginia's lifetime in 1921, the British government would try to legislate against gross indecency between women, but then they thought the better of it because they were like, I think if we make this law, then we're going to encourage lesbianism more than we would
Smart.
suppress it, right? It's like, don't name the thing because then people will do the thing. But this is also a big period for women. It's, you know, Coco Chanel, the Roaring 20s. There's a lot of gender bending. Everything post the First World War kind of changes. And there are also a lot of lesbian precedents in English history, in English literature. So Queen Anne is one of the most famous, and her affair, that's what the movie The Favourite is
Right.
based on, her affair with the Duchess of Marlborough, and then another girl. And then there's Afra Bain, who was one of the first female professional playwrights in 17th century England. Definitely, probably bisexual. And Virginia and Vita definitely thought she was. Vita actually wrote a biography about her. There was Anne Lister from that HBO show, Gentleman Jack.
Oh
Have
my
you seen
God.
that?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
good.
What
Total
a
top.
trailblazer. Yeah.
Total top, absolutely would let her do anything to me. And then there are these Boston marriages that are, you know, wealthy women living together in older age. There are actually some really famous ones in Wales called the Ladies of Llangollen. And they become really famous for just being women who live together and have a beautiful domestic life for like 50 years. So women are good at shacking up together already, as we know.
Yeah.
And it's mostly privileged women. But anyway, the point is Victorian England is terrible for sex, for love. And Virginia Woolf is going to sort of burst onto this scene and with a bunch of her friends kind of change the game.
Act 1. Virginia, bisexual genius.
Virginia Woolf. It's a sad life. It's especially in the beginning, but it's also kind of a nice life. And we're not going to do like a whole biography. You can go watch the Hours or whatever the fuck you want to learn about Virginia Woolf.
Just ask AI to print out a...
Yeah, chat GPT it. That's what we did with the script. Just kidding, there's no script.
Just kidding.
So
They're never taking our jobs. We're too weird for that.
Donal,
Sorry.
rein it in. So Virginia Woolf is born January 25th, 1882, which makes her an Aquarius. And I looked this up on my CoStar app because that is the most lesbian thing you can do, is astrologically place a
I
woman.
thought you were talking about me co-star, like the Eisner Aquarius. And I was about to tell you, I'm
no,
so
no, I rarely think of you. No, so that makes her an Aquarius, okay, which means, and I quote, she was fundamentally unconventional, comfortable dissenting, and had an intellectual talent for abstraction oriented towards pushing boundaries. I think that's a pretty fucking good description of Virginia Woolf, actually.
Yeah,
She
absolutely.
did push a lot of
Spot on.
boundaries. Anyway, she has kind of a nice life. Like, she's basically from the upper middle class. Her father is an intellectual and writer, critic. Her mother is a very famous beauty, and there's actually photographs of her done by Julia Margaret Cameron, if you know that photographer who took these gorgeous pre-Raphaelite photos. Look it up.
And they were, like, her mother, which I thought was very interesting, both her mother and father were, like, born in India, right?
Yeah, well,
Which
that was
is-
a lot of British people of this class
Right.
at the time.
Yeah,
because they
yeah.
were all sort of colonial cronies over there.
Which is so kind of exotic when you think about it, especially in the 1860s, 70s, or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
I mean, they were also like crushing the nation and
Yeah.
ruining it economically.
Well,
But
absolutely, yeah. But interesting fact.
let bygones be bygones.
Vivian Lee was born around the same time in India, actually.
Your dog?
One of my personal obsessions. My dog is called Vivian Lee. Anyway, let's not wander too far off the well-trodden
So-
Virginia Woolf path.
No, the point is, and we will be getting drunk on this episode, so I apologize if it's
happening.
difficult for anyone. But she has lots of friends. Oh.
A few inches later.
You want to humanize yourself for the listeners. Stars are just like you guys. So they grow up with a ton of famous friends like Henry James, George Eliot, all of these big names in literature. So and Vanessa is the third child of four, so she's kind of in the middle. And she has a very complicated relationship with her older sister, Vanessa, but very close. She really admires her. Toby is kind of like the older brother that she wants to be like. When he goes up to Cambridge, she's really annoyed that she can't go to school and all of that. And but anyway, more importantly, there are some very early tragedies in her life, which color the rest of her sort of personal history of mental illness. Her mother dies when she's 13, which is fucking early, but I think relatively common in that period too. And then her half-sister, Stella, dies a couple years later, and she's very close with her. She's also apparently sexually abused by her half-brothers, who were related to Stella, George and Gerald.
The Duckworths.
The Duckworths, yeah. Exactly. And it's kind of unclear exactly what happened, but Virginia spoke about it later in her life. Her father then dies in 1904 when she's 22 or something like that. So, I mean, she just has a rough go of it. But her father dying is actually kind of a big moment.
You know what? Apparently, from what I can gather, she only in later life she appreciated her mother, but like during her early formative years, she was very much felt indebted, and she kind of like sanctified and really put her father up on a very on a pedestal,
and then it sort of like switches.
It switches a little
she
bit.
becomes a little salty about her dad in later years, and she really venerates her mother, as I'm sure you would if they died that young.
And also what I found a little bit interesting about the father as well, if I may, just before we carry on, was just in terms of...
Oh, please, go ahead.
In terms of her education, which I think was very interesting, is that like women of the time weren't allowed to go to... school, essentially. But they had a massive library, right?
Yeah,
her dad,
big library, and her dad really encouraged
her.
And
didn't edit anything. So in a strange way, Virginia was reading like what the boys wouldn't have been allowed to read at Cambridge and stuff like that. She read everything greedily, she described.
Yeah, and she later complained about her not having any education, but her father actually did send her to King's College London. She got a bunch of her girlfriends together. They studied Latin, ancient Greek, They studied history.
Introduced to the suffragettes and everything at that time,
yes,
right?
Yeah. So it's not like she was like in the midst of this big bourgeois family. She had an education, but she was a major autodidact. She taught herself a lot of history. She read literature voraciously and developed extremely original opinions on everything because it was just her, I think. She wasn't being led by
teachers. Which I think is so important, yeah.
So, Daddy dies in 1904. She's actually not that sad about it, it seems, at the time, because he's kind of been a dick in the past couple of years, and he also was really sick for 2 years, so it was just sort of like unfair to him to, keep having cancer. So the kids finally move out and they finally get away from the Duckworths. They move to Bloomsbury, which becomes very important for them. They set up their own house, basically. So it's like chic as fuck.
Yeah.
They go traveling in Europe, it's not a bad life. And when they get back, though, Virginia has one of her first nervous breakdowns. And it's interesting, people think that she's sort of just like depressed, but she had some serious mental illness. Like these episodes that she had in the beginning of her life, she was raving mad, like got institutionalized. It wasn't just like she was kind of depressed some of the time, So there were some moments in her life where she went through these periods and it was like really dark. At the same time, her brother dies in 1906, Toby. So she's 24 when that happens. And then Vanessa gets married to Clive Bell, who becomes a great friend of theirs. So it's just like one loss after the other, because Vanessa moves out to establish her own house with Clive.
It's so confusing because there's so many like brothers and sisters and half-brothers and people dying.
Yeah, it's a big-ass family.
So it must have been very confusing for her.
She does get this like one after the other kind of domino effect of tragedies. And then at the same time, she has these really passionate friendships, we call them, with women, even though she was definitely in love with some of them. So one of them is Violet Dickinson, who's this older woman that becomes kind of a maternal figure to her in her early life. And then the next one is Madge Vaughan, who she definitely told Vita that she was in love with when she was a child.
Madge Vaughan,
who is the daughter of another historical homo, John Addington Symonds, because all British people are what? A little bit gay.
A little gay bash, yeah.
So she does have this, little passionate affair, but it never materializes into something serious and realized. Madge, interestingly, becomes Sally in Mrs. Dalloway, which, if anyone has read, that's Clarissa Dalloway has a sort of dalliance nice.
Yeah.
With Sally in like in a memory that they have, they share a kiss or something, which is like, oh my God, so sexy. But anyway, they're all just flirtations. Virginia is not a very sexual person, possibly because of the abuse that she suffered. That's what some scholars think. And importantly, she does not describe herself as a sapphist. She doesn't think that she's a lesbian.
So is she bisexual, do you think?
I mean, yeah, like she's definitely something because she basically prefers women in every way to men, including sexually and erotically and romantically.
Yeah. It also seems to me like a lot of the like full on, Kinsey scale, I suppose, gay people at the time were, literally just going with convention, and eventually, like we were talking about earlier on, like eventually they decided they have to kind of just settle down. Or like Oscar Wilde, who was definitely flaming homosexual, like married and had kids.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of like what you did at the time. It's like, but the Bloomsbury group thought differently about that for sure. So round about this time, Virginia is also starting to become a professional writress. She is writing for journalistic outlets like kind of small fry, targeted towards women, and then eventually she starts to get reviews and articles in the Times Literary Supplement in respectable publications. She starts to make some actual money from it, which they need because they don't have oodles of money.
Right.
She also starts writing her first novel around this time, The Voyage Out in 1907,
Voyage Out, yeah. Which is important to mention that it's kind of like all around the time of the modernist movement, right? So everything that's happening.
That's actually all we're going to mention about it because I've never read it and I know absolutely nothing about it.
Yeah. I know a little bit about it, actually. I think it's kind of interesting.
It is very experimental.
Yeah.
She like hits the scene hard and it's largely due to the influence of this Bloomsbury group, which consists of primarily these boys from Cambridge that her older brother Toby had made friends with, and the Stephen, her real name's Virginia Stephen, forgot to mention that. The Stephen sisters, and then their sort of female contacts in London, who are all interested in art. And there's no real unifying philosophy in the Bloomsbury group, but the big thing about them is that they do not take any of the Victorian shit about sex. So they think that gender doesn't matter, like whoever you love is who you love. And they're also not bothered by polyamory or being in multiple open relationships. And Vita Sackville-West, who she'll later have this relationship with, has one of the most famous open marriages with her own husband. And they're like prominent people.
And E.M. Forster was in the Bloomsbury
E.M.
Set.
Forster is also there. Lytton Strachey, who's a big homo. Virginia refers to him as her female friend.
Yes, Queen.
Which is icy. There's Roger Fry, there's Duncan Grant. They're all of these not very well known today, but they're artists who were pretty big, artists and critics who were pretty big at the time. And they launch, a exhibition about the Impressionists, and that really influences Virginia because what she wants to do is sort of do what the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists have done in art, but in literature, which is capture the essence of something through the little accidental experiences of it and not do it in a realistic way. She doesn't like realist art. She
Right, like
wants
the Joycean kind of model as well was around that time as well. The stories are about something, but what's underlying the rivers and the seas underneath the actual words are what's important.
Yeah, and it can be hard to read actually a lot of the time. Like when you read The Waves by Virginia Woolf, you're like, the fuck is going on here?
Yeah,
or at least I was.
Or Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake as well.
I can't read that shit at all.
It's
that Irish shit. Sorry.
Amazing.
So the Bloomsbury group is obsessed with art. They're also all pacifists, which becomes important because World War I's about to hit. And they fucking love homosexuality. So now I would like to do a dramatic reading.
The Society of Buggers from Memoirs of Being, 1928. Another scene has always lived in my memory. I do not know if I invented it or not. As the best illustration of Bloomsbury, it was a spring evening. Vanessa and I were sitting in the drawing room. At any moment, her husband, Clive, might come in and he and I should begin arguing. Vanessa sat silent and did something mysterious with her needle or her scissors. I talked, egotistically, excitedly, about my own affairs, no doubt. Suddenly, the door opened, and the long, sinister figure of Mr. Lytton Strachey stood on the threshold. He pointed his finger at a stain on Vanessa's white dress. "Semen?" he said. Can one really say it? I thought, and we burst out laughing. With that one word, all barriers of reticence and reserve went down. A flood of the sacred fluid seemed to overwhelm us. Sex permeated our conversation. The word bugger was never far from our lips.
So this is a perfect encapsulation to Virginia Woolf 20 years later of the kind of shit that they would talk about, you know? And for that, it doesn't seem like a big deal to us, but for a bunch of British well-to-do people coming together every Thursday and Friday night and being like, oh, yes, Harold is stooping Toby and all of that, you know, was like a big deal. It really, it was out in the open. And the same thing suddenly extended to women as well, because the women in this group also started having lesbian relationships with each other. And they started getting married and then still having those lesbian relationships. So it's a big tangled knot, you know?
Yeah.
And Leonard Woolf also enters the scene at this point, or re-enters the scene, and he will be the one to eventually marry Virginia Woolf in 1912 or something like that. And even though that's, you know, her kind of main relationship in her life, and they do love each other, and they do apparently try to have sex and have a child, but eventually just abandon it.
They never had any children.
They never had any children, even though, and Virginia doesn't seem to have liked children that much. She liked children, but she didn't want to have her own from the letters that I read. And so Virginia and Leonard settle down into this domestic partnership, but it's just a partnership. It's not really a sexual relationship as we would understand it. But I don't know. It's kind of like, who cares, you know?
Who cares?
Yeah. And it becomes a financial partnership too, because they buy a printing press and
And by the way, it sounds like they were a great partnership.
Yeah,
I
no.
mean, the way she speaks about him, you know, especially towards the end of her life and how he treated her. I mean, in a large way, he was her emotional support for her entire adult life.
Totally. And that's like in the beginning of their relationship, he was the only reason that she was able to survive these bouts of mental illness.
Yeah.
But
let's face it, if she was afforded the same kind of rights and privileges as a modern woman, she probably just would have lived outrightly as a full-on lesbian. Probably would have been in the same sex.
No, I don't think so. I think she had a really different sexual identity. She just doesn't seem to have been interested in sex with men. But I don't think that made her purely lesbian, because she did love men. She was in relationships with men, you know. But
she did have a lot of sexual relationships with women. They're only ones that she really had
a
sexual
couple.
relationships. Okay.
I don't think she had that much sex to begin with. I think Virginia was a little dowdy, a little cobwebby down there.
Oh, really? Bless her heart.
But they buy this printing press and things start to get a little more, you know.
Tell me the name of the printing press, because I love it.
Hogarth Press, because they have it in their house called Hogarth House in Richmond, just outside of London. And they literally have it in the basement. They do the type, they set the type.
Which is still around today, Hogarth Press, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And they set the type and they do all of the binding, and it actually apparently helps Virginia Woolf get through some of the mental illness because it keeps her busy. And at the same time, she's writing, writes another novel, you know, so her life sort of takes off from there in the 1920s, and she starts to become a really respected literary figure, even though her books don't really sell that much because they're not, you know.
And she's self-publishing everything with Hogarth Press.
Yeah, except for like one or two of them, which Duckworth Press publishes.
Okay.
Her sexually abusive half brother.
I wonder if she ever confronted the Duckworths about the sexual abuse.
No, I don't think she did, but she wrote about it in these memoirs. You know, I don't think she was trying to like go after them and because it all happened when they were kids.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so it's not sort of the same thing as like an adult abusing a child, but they were older children and she was younger, and it was that kind of thing. So that's Virginia's life. In the beginning, at least. We'll get back to her. But now we need to do Vita Sackville-West, who is considerably sexier.
Act 2. Vita, other bisexual genius. Oh, I'll see where this is
A
going.
little bit more of a devil-may-care kind of aristocratic.
Yeah, I mean, she's rich. She's rich.
Fair enough.
It really helps to be rich. And of course, in keeping with good lesbian practice, we will be reading her astrological chart.
What sign was she?
She was born March 9th, 1892, so she's 10 years younger than Virginia, which, according to CoStar, means she was I think she was a Pisces, first of all.
Like myself.
Like yourself.
Me and Vita have a lot in common.
So this is what you are too. She was fundamentally dreamy, insightful, in her own world, with a rich imagination, endowing her with a strong intuition to hidden emotional currents.
That's literally who I am.
It's almost like these
I'm
descriptions.
looking into your mouth as those words were coming out.
Oh.
And I could
Okay.
just
Trying
see...
to fuck me.
Semen? Okay, so I'm Vita Sackville-West reincarnated.
You're Vita, I'm Virginia.
That.
No, Vita is born an aristocrat. Her father is the 3rd Baron Sackville or something gay like that. And she's also the granddaughter of a Spanish ballerina.
Chic.
Very chic. Whose name is Pepita. Love that. And
I love how they introduced a little bit of like Mediterranean manure to the blood. I'm sure that they were all getting a bit horsey looking there at...
Mediterranean manure?
Yeah, darling, they needed some good genes. They were all starting to look like each other's fathers.
Okay, we're doing this with dogs now because Virginia and Vita love dogs. We are kind of like English aristocracy today.
This is Vivian Lee and this is Montgomery Clift, by the way, everybody. Welcome. You'll be seeing a lot more of them. We can't keep them away. They just refuse to be out of the frame.
So, back to me. Vita's mother is the daughter of this Spanish ballerina, Pepita, and she's raised in France. Like, they're all very chic,
Totally.
you know.
And the house is 4 acres under roof in Kent, if I remember.
Vita is born at this famous country house called Knole, Knole. They call it a country house in England. It's a fucking castle. It's 4 acres, just the building itself, and then it's on 1,000 acres of Kentish countryside. And the big problem, though, is that she grows up in this fabulous castle, but she's the only child of the Baron, and she's a girl, so she definitely cannot inherit. It's like Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
You know, like when she has to marry the guy because she can't inherit Downton.
Cousin, what's his name?
Yeah, whatever the fuck.
Creepy.
He dies. Sorry, spoiler alert. But Vita is very passionate as a child. She's a tomboy. She writes a shit ton. She writes like 5 novels by the time she's 18 or something like that. It's so annoying. Precocious bitch. But she has
Overachiever.
Yeah, she has a fantastic childhood from what I can tell. She's a little bit of an outsider, though. And she also learns kind of early on, I guess, that she has these lesbian proclivities.
Okay.
Because she, unlike Virginia, is definitely gay. I mean, bisexual in the sense that she had sex with men as well, but she clearly has more lesbian leanings and wrote to that effect later in her life. She has a little affair with this girl, Rosamond, when she's young. Actually, I have to read what she wrote about her because it's so funny. My liaison with Rosamond was, in a sense, superficial. I mean that it was almost exclusively physical, hot. As, to be frank, she always bored me as a companion. I was very fond of her, however. She had a sweet nature, but she was quite stupid. Which is just like totally what you want to hear from your lover. Anyway, she marries Harold Nicholson in 1913. I don't think he's an aristocrat, but he becomes an extremely important diplomat. So he's like at the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. He takes Vita all over the world to Iran and Turkey and all of these places. They love traveling together. And he later becomes a journalist and a writer and all of that as well. He's also really involved in World War II. He's like a big deal. So she marries this guy. They absolutely they absolutely adore each other. But they figure out that they're both bisexual.
Oh.
And after Vita pumps out 2 kids, she's sort of like, let's just have an open thing. And they start an open relationship that becomes really the talk of the town, shall we say. So, and that's the thing about Vita Sackville-West is like, she's not really remembered as much as Virginia Woolf, because Virginia Woolf is, you know, the feminist hero who wrote all these beautiful books, tragically killed herself. Vita Sackville-West was way more famous than Virginia Woolf in their time. She was more successful as an author, and everybody was talking about her because they used to talk about aristocrats, you know, the same way we talk about Kim Kardashian today. Like those were
you talk about Kim Kardashian. I never mentioned her with the word never comes out of my lips.
I would never.
Vita Sackville-West. What a beautiful ring there is to that name as well.
Vita Sackville-West. It's actually Victoria, but they call her Vita.
So she was, by all accounts, just this amazing kind of like devil-may-care hair, cut this crazy silhouette across London, the bright young things, like just the quintessential.
The pretty young things.
Yeah.
Yes. She has a real gift.
It girl of London.
She was an it girl, yes.
Yeah.
She was an it girl. But she had a real gift for satire, and she mocked her own generation as well a lot later on in a book called The Edwardians, which was one of her big best-selling books. And she actually enters into a very public affair with a woman named Violet Trefusis. I don't know how you pronounce her name. But one scholar describes it as a mutual psychosexual obsession.
Who is this fucking scholar? Was it you? Did you describe it?
And that scholar is me. No. But it's very like Notes on a Scandal vibes. You know that movie with Kate Blanchett?
Obsessed with each other.
And yeah, they are absolutely obsessed with each other. They both are married to men, but they lead this completely open relationship with each other, at least for all of upper class society to see. Eventually, they run off together to Monte Carlo. It's like 1918. Harold Nicholson, Vita's husband, is busy doing the Treaty of Versailles or whatever, like fixing World War I, and she's off gallivanting with this harpy in the south of France, having a blast. She apparently dresses up as a guy named Julian.
Married to her.
Right, in some like mock thing.
Yeah.
But she disguises herself as a wounded soldier from World War I named Julian and just carries on in this relationship. So it's absolutely bonkers. She has an amazing time from what we can tell. It's like a couple of years that they're going back and forth to France. But eventually in 1920, Harold and Violet's husband fly over to France and they're like,
knock it off.
Get your asses home now. And they kind of have to, give in to that. And I think they also gave in because they were sort of both not doing well from the mutual psychosexual obsession.
Right.
Starting to sort of wear them thin.
Yeah.
And Vita, actually, it was starting to get preposterous too. Like Vita gets mad at Violet for fucking her husband or something.
You're my husband.
And Vita's like, I'll never speak to her again. And it all sort of calms down because of that. And then they see each other later in life. But that is Vita Sackville-West's sort of big lesbian entree onto the scene.
And there's horsey old Virginia hiding in a corner in her tweeds and her, bad complexion.
And then although I think Virginia Woolf was kind of beautiful.
When she was young,
She was beautiful.
You see certain portraits of her and that she was certainly.
Someone always says, I can't remember who it was, but that she was not pretty but beautiful. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So she has like a very, very fine features like her mom. And it's around about this time at the end of 1922 that Vita meets Virginia for the first time at a party thrown by Virginia's brother-in-law, Clive Bell. So now I shall read from that meeting. I simply adore Virginia Woolf, and so would you. You would fall quite flat before her charm and personality. It was a good party. Mrs. Woolf is so simple. She does give the impression of something big. Utterly unaffected. There's no outward adornment. She dresses quite atrociously. At first you think she's plain, then a sort of spiritual beauty imposes itself on you, and you find a fascination in watching her. She is both detached and human, silent till she wants to say something, and then says it supremely well. She is quite old. I've rarely taken such a fancy to anyone, and I think she likes me. Darling, I have quite lost my heart.
She's quite old.
She says about Virginia that she's quite old because she's 10 years older than her.
Oh.
And I guess Vita is just 30 now.
Oh, so Virginia is 10 years older than Vita.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Vita has this beautiful meeting with her and they're like pretty smitten, but it doesn't turn into something passionate for a couple of years. But I think it's a beautiful letter because it already starts to show that they have this kind of spiritual connection that isn't just physical, I mean, lesbians. But they really connect in that moment. They write to each other every other week in 1923. And I've read all of their letters. It's an incredible read if you just go through and read their relationship from like 1923 to 1941 when Virginia dies.
And do they elope together a lot, like to Hampton Court, like the letter you were reading earlier on? I mean, like...
They do. They visit each other.
She was speaking in metaphors, Virginia, when she wrote that letter.
Well, I think
about the moonlight in Hampton Court.
No, that letter was like a real invitation because she wanted Vita to come hang out with her at Hampton Court, and I don't think she actually did. So I don't think the letter worked.
Okay.
Even though that's a horny letter. That horny letter would fucking work on me, I'll tell you that.
Shit.
So
throw away your husband.
Throw over your man.
Throw over your man.
So very importantly, Vita, because she has this high profile, is able to help Virginia and Leonard make some money. So she starts publishing her books at the Hogarth Press because she respects Virginia so much. And it's interesting, they have a kind of uneven relationship in some ways. Vita is her social superior in the rigid class system in England at the time, but Virginia is Vita's intellectual superior. So, and I'll read a little thing later from Virginia. But
yeah, what also I find so interesting about the relationship is that, like, Virginia, her whole life, you read that, because of these kind of hysterical episodes and her mental health, issues that she had, she was always told that she was sickly. She was told that the writing wasn't good for her, right? She was told that all her intellectual pursuits weren't necessarily what she should be doing, that she should be doing physical pursuits. Like, there's these funny instances of her being like gardening ferociously because she thought that would kind of assuage some of her like mental breakdowns or whatever. But what I find interesting about Vita, and I think this has happened to, this can happen a lot to a gay, right, in their life, or somebody that hasn't necessarily been around a lot of like-minded people or homosexuals, and they come of age, and then all of a sudden they're entered into whatever society it is that they've entered into, and they meet somebody, if they're lucky, that will tell them that they're okay. It's okay being.
Yeah.
It's okay being who they are. What they told you was a lie. In actual fact, what you think makes you weak is really your strength. And I think that's what Vita did for Virginia. I don't really think that there would be quite a self-realized and actualized writer that has such a worldly, dark, poetic vision if it hadn't been for Vita. I mean, Vita's the inspiration for Orlando, which is your favorite book.
It is absolutely my favorite book. I think she looks at Vita and she knows that she can't be like her. I'll read the thing in a bit, but she knows that Vita is a different sort of woman than her, and that extends to her sexuality and the way that she has all of these affairs and gives herself so freely to people. But I think you're right that having this relationship with Vita completely changes her life and changes her ability to see herself as a loving woman in a loving relationship. Because she does love men, she does love her husband, but not in the same, it's in a familial way. It's not in the same way as she passionately loves Vita and gets jealous over Vita. I mean, you read the letters and it's spicy, it's delicious.
But also she just looks down on her a little bit too, right? Because she knows that she's not necessarily as good of a writer. Like her little secret with Vita is that she's.
But that's what I mean is, like, when I say it's uneven, but it works, it fits, because they each have things that the other one doesn't have. Like, Virginia is extremely intelligent and intellectual and sophisticated in her mind, but she's not good at socializing in the same way that Vita is. She doesn't sort of embrace the world. And I think that's what pulls them together, and that's what attracts Virginia to Vita so much. She doesn't look down on her, I would say. Right. She knows for a fact, and Vita knows for a fact, that she's a better writer than Vita.
But
she just is.
Vita knows that, and she's okay with it. She wants to bring that out in Virginia.
Yeah. It does.
Which is nice, because she's not intimidated by it. She's not jealous of her talent.
She really builds her up. And that's what I was going to say is the other part of what you were saying is, because the writing is so intense for Virginia, like Leonard often says that the writing is partly responsible for her mental breakdowns in her early years. Because of that, Vita is able to sort of guide her through that and encourage her to write and tell her, you are valuable, what you're doing is worthwhile, because that's Virginia's big thing. That's all artists' big thing is like, is what I'm saying or doing worth anything in this stupid little world? Yeah. And eventually Virginia believes that it isn't. And that's why she kills herself. I'm not
to find a point of it, ladies and gentlemen, but I do think that the cosmic explosion of Vita Sackville-West and Virginia Woolf meeting each other was one of the reasons why we have the depth of kind of work that we have from her today.
Act 3, Vita and Virginia, a love story.
So yes, they have this little mismatch, in their kind of unevenness. And the other part of that is that they both know how to play each other well. And we'll see that in their letters in a second. Like, Vita really knows how to make Virginia feel like she loves her. Do you know what I mean? And so she's able to sort of twirl her around her finger in this beautiful way. And Virginia knows how to behave in a sort of detached way, like she doesn't care that much, but she obviously definitely does, because she gets extremely jealous by Vita and all of her other extracurricular affairs that she has with women, and I think a man or two during this period.
And she rubs it in Virginia's face a couple of times at various parties around London.
I think she was indiscreet. Yeah, she wasn't as. But that's that was the name of Vita's game. She's in an open relationship with her husband. Like, she's going to do what she wants, but she wants to maintain this spiritually romantic relationship with Virginia at the same time.
Right.
So I want to read a letter that Vita wrote in 1926. Oh, and by the way, this is juicy. In 1926, Vita also writes to her husband, Harold, and is like, don't worry. We're not in a muddle. And that was their word for relationship. Virginia, meaning Virginia and her, are not in a serious relationship. We've only been to bed twice. So we know that they had definitely fucked by that time. Oh. And Vita was kind of trying to play it cool with Harold, because I think Harold was probably jealous that she was very, very infatuated with Virginia at this point. This is like 1926, 1927. This is sort of the height of their relationship.
Right. But Harold probably had a dick in his mouth at the same time.
But Harold was too busy bottoming in Iran to care.
Hot. Okay. So should I read the letter to...
read the letter title.
Vita Sackville-West to Virginia Woolf from Trieste. On the 21st of January, 1926, I am reduced to a thing that wants Virginia. I composed a beautiful letter to you in the sleepless nightmare hours of the night, and it is all gone. I just miss you. In quite a simple, desperate human way, you, with all your undumb letters, would never write so elementary a phrase as that. Perhaps you wouldn't even feel it, and yet I believe you'll be sensible of a little gap. But you'd clothe it in so exquisite a phrase that it would lose a little of its reality, whereas with me, it is quite stark. I miss you, even more than I could have believed, and I was prepared to miss you a good deal. It's incredible how essential to me you have become. That's amazing.
I mean, when has anyone ever written you a letter like that?
I mean, do you think that they were like going overboard with these letters? Like, or do they genuinely actually have this depth of feeling for each other?
Let's remember, lesbians. So they definitely have this depth of feeling. And the other thing is, like I was just saying, is I think Vita knows how to spin this love for Virginia, right? They are both writers, right? And they are creating their relationship as much as they're actually experiencing it. From what I can tell when you read the letters, and Vita writes in this sort of, bearing her heart to Virginia. She's transparent in a way, but also dreamy, and definitely sees the bigger psychological side of their relationship. When Virginia writes back, it's much more curt, and she has these flashes where she's very emotional and has these beautiful turns of phrase, but she never says, I miss you so deeply. Like, she doesn't talk in that kind of plain human register. So I don't know, it's interesting. They kind of play off of each other, because Virginia not giving Vita that is also what makes Vita want Virginia more and more. But I just love that first line is so famous. I am reduced to a thing that wants Virginia. And she wrote that when she was on her way to meet Harold in Iran, so that he would stop bottoming for 5 seconds. And so Vita is always going away as well. So I think that also figures into their letter writing, like when the distance makes the heart grow fonder kind of thing. They're constantly saying goodbye to each other.
Yeah, she's probably smoking all sorts of opium and everything on some.
She was having the time of her goddamn life, I'm sure.
I'm not buying it, but anyway, no, of course I am. It's amazing, but Jesus Christ, what a beautiful letter.
And like we said, Vita is at the same time stooping all these other girls, and one of them is Mary Campbell, who Virginia gets very upset about because she is a member of the Bloomsbury group, and I think Virginia feels kind of threatened by her intellect. She's like a real society woman, and hosts parties and all of that. She's, again, something that Virginia can't be. Virginia is a more introverted. She still goes out, and she's still very witty, and she's still great at dinner parties, but she can't be the sort of hostess,
And just to piggyback on that for a second, all the while, Virginia is slowly and surely like getting further and further away from the nucleus of London, because her nerves can't really handle it as she gets older, right?
Yeah, they go.
She's not in Richmond anymore now. They've moved.
She's not in Richmond anymore. They've moved to what's I think it's called Monk's House, and
right, in
it's
Surrey
or something. It's in And Vanessa, her sister, had a house in called Charleston there as well, and they're both Charleston is a real hangout for the Bloomsbury group throughout this period. So she does keep a house in London too, though. She goes back and forth. Yeah.
Didn't she very famously say that she had to leave London because she would die of distraction?
Yeah. But I think, she was a social. I think we have this image of Virginia Woolf as like in her basement in her dowdy little robes writing her little.
No, that was Emily Dickinson. Was that?
Yeah. A different kind of lesbian.
Sylvia Plath. She's very basementy.
Sylvia Plath. No, I feel like Sylvia Plath was cool. Wasn't she kind of an it girl too? She was because she was like married to Ted Hughes or whatever that guy's name is. She killed
herself too, though, didn't she?
Yeah. A lot of killing themselves.
Jesus.
Everyone take a breather. So, no, but Virginia Woolf was like out and about in London. Like she went to parties. She was cool. She did lots of shit.
She just got really bad hangovers. She just couldn't cope with the hangovers.
Yes. I think she probably had migraines, actually. When you read the letters, it's like, I have a terrible headache. I have a terrible headache. And a headache that makes her like go to sleep for 100 years. It's it's a migraine. But so the thing I wanted to say, though, is that Virginia is very impressed by this side of Vita that is the society hostess. And so I'm just going to read this little passage from her where she's writing in her own diary about Vita Sackville-West. Okay, so it goes, "These saphists love women. Friendship is never untinged with amorosity. I like Vita and being with her and the splendor. She shines in the grocer's shop in Sevenoaks." Wow, you say that 7 times fast. She shines in the grocer's shop.
She shines in the grocer's shop.
We'll do that later. "She shines in the grocer's shop in Sevenoaks with a candle-lit radiance, stalking on legs like beech trees, pink glowing, grape clustered, pearl hung. What is the effect of all this on me? Very mixed. There is her maturity and full-breastedness, her being so much in full sail on the high tides, where I am coasting down backwaters. Her capacity, I mean, to take the floor in any company, to represent her country, to visit Chatsworth, to control silver, servants, chow dogs. Her motherhood, but she is a little cold and offhand with her boys. Her being, in short, what I have never been, a real woman. In brain and insight, she is not as highly organized as I am. But then she is aware of this, and so lavishes on me the maternal protection which, for some reason, is what I have always most wished from everyone. What Leonard gives me, and Nessa and Vita, in her more clumsy external way, tries to give me." So you can see, she's like, she doesn't look down on her. She has this vision of her as a type of woman that she can never be. And it draws her to her for years and years and years. And this is right about the time that she starts writing Orlando, which you brought up earlier, which to Virginia is kind of a parody of the genre of biography, but more importantly, is a beautiful expression of her admiration for Vita and this aristocratic background that she comes from. So Orlando is definitely my favorite book by Virginia Woolf that charts an aristocrat named Orlando from the 1500s up to 1928. And the last day in the book is the day before it was published in 1928. Yeah. So it's just like so clever. And in the middle of it, Orlando goes through a sex change. And this is Virginia's way of bringing to light, of novelizing Vita's bisexuality, because she sort of associates sexuality with gender in that, more.
It just seems so incredibly like ahead of its time, and but yet eternal in its theme of like transition and trans and transformation, and ancestry and being a part of a longer line of gays and lesbians and trans and LGBT.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the first transgender novels, like in terms of someone actually transitioning overtly. But I don't think it's not that interested in sexuality. It's much more interested in like the aristocratic side. And in Orlando is a poet and trying to become a poet, like Vita was a poet and a novelist. So I think it's just this Nigel Nicholson, Vita's son, called it the longest and most charming love letter in English literature. And that's really what it feels like. It's just like this gorgeous meditation on Vita and what her life could have been if she existed from the 1500s up to now. So I don't know. It's a weird fucking book, honestly. Like halfway in, the protagonist goes to sleep and wakes up a woman. It's like could happen to anyone, I guess.
And all the locations, Constantinople, and all these.
Yeah, it's fabulous. It's fucking fabulous.
Yeah,
we're watching the movie after this.
The movie.
So at this point, they also go away together for, I think, their only real trip where it's just them. They go to Burgundy, and Virginia writes about it in her letters, and she's very worried that they might figure each other out and that it would ruin the relationship. But instead, they just have a beautiful time together. There's this really cute scene where there's a thunderstorm and Vita comes into Virginia's bedroom at like 2 a.m. and they just talk about death and love and for like 3 hours. It's like, sounds fucking cheery. But it is hot. There's something hot about it. Anyway, Orlando happens. It's actually quite a successful book. It's one of Virginia's more successful books because all of her books are so fucking experimental that no one wants to read them. And after that, they sort of start to slip into less and less of a tight relationship, especially because Virginia starts hanging out with this other lesbian named Ethel Smythe, who is a composer and also 75 years old. So it's like, I think that's where we get the dowdy image of Virginia from, because she's just like wants to hang out with old ladies and be an old lady all the time. But Vita wants to move to the countryside, live in her new castle and have her garden, be a fabulous bisexual and just get fat in the country.
Yeah.
Sounds fantastic.
Absolutely.
Virginia keeps writing. Vita has some novels that come out that are super successful, so she's like raking it in. And then eventually fascism happens in the 1930s, more tragedies, more people going to war, and that really brings them together again. And they have a sort of beautiful, when you read the letters, that we have a bunch of them from 1940 and 1939 when the war is just starting. And they write to each other about the bombs dropping and thinking about each other sitting alone in their houses. It's all very tender and touching.
I often think how terrifying it must have been, especially if you, if you identified. For everybody, but identifying as a queer person and the marked, the rise of the Third Reich and Nazism and how they just kind of like steamrolled across Europe and like all of these stories that must have been coming out of because Berlin before the Second World War was like a queer mecca.
Yeah.
And these people must have been terrifying.
Yeah, and it's also just like the basic economics of war. When you're reading their letters, Vita sends Virginia 2 pounds of butter, and it's like she's been eating her out for 6 years. Like, it's like the biggest gift that she could possibly give her.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And it's just, you can feel the risk of the Germans about to invade England because they tore into Paris and then they're literally about to fly over. Yeah. Well, they do fly over with all the bombs. But so anyway, back to tragedy, everyone, because Virginia Woolf then can't take it anymore in 1941 and walks into the River Ouse half a mile from her house and drowns herself by putting stones in her pockets. And the letter that Vita writes to her husband when she hears about it is so sad. It's just completely heartbroken, completely split in two. But later on, there is one silver lining, I think, which is that after Vita dies in 1962, I think.
She lived to a ripe old age.
Yeah, not bad, like 70 or something like that. When she dies, she leaves this big Gladstone leather bag full of letters to her female lovers, and she's written a note in it, which I'm going to read because it's so interesting. And it was found by her son Nigel, who then used it to write a lot about the bisexuality of her mother, of his mother, his father, and Virginia. So she leaves this note that says, "The psychology of people like myself will be a matter of interest, and I believe it will be recognized that many more people of my type do exist than under the present-day system of hypocrisy is commonly admitted. I am not saying that such personalities and the connections which result from them will not be deplored as they are now, but I do believe that their greater prevalence and the spirit of candor which one hopes will spread with the progress of the world will lead to their recognition."
Amen to that.
Isn't that so interesting? She's like leaving behind all of these letters and being like, people are probably always going to be a little bit grossed out by gays, but I think it's going to get better.
Yeah.
And that's
pretty
much what happened.
I just love Vita Sackville-West.
I know, I fucking love her.
Oh my God.
I love them both.
I love Virginia Woolf. She's gotten her due. I just feel, I wonder if even...
but like Virginia, you want to have tea with and like talk shit about people. Yeah. I feel like you want to like do coke and go to Moscow with Vita Sackville-West.
She was in the back of just big old Rolls Royces, just doing bumps with
such a boss,
strings of pearls, and,
sluts everywhere.
Sluts everywhere. She literally was the notorious B.I.G.
And I think also reading the letter, I read the whole book to prepare for this, like back to front of their letters. It's a great collection. I know, I'm so noble. There's this great collection that Penguin came out with. And just as a gay man, like, I feel like it's really hard for gay men to fall in love. Like, we just don't love.
It's hard for you to fall in love. Because you've got black heart.
I'm absolutely sobbing.
Keep on reading your Vita Sackville-West letters, you lonely bitch.
It's funny because it's true.
Just kidding. I love you.
No, it's easy for gay men to fuck. We fuck. Yeah. Lesbians don't fuck as much, but they do love a lot and easily and really well. And I feel like
they partner, like especially in the modern era with all the rights and you know afforded by the laws and all the rest of it, they seem to partner for like life. Like they partner for a very, very long time. They don't
U-Haul effect.
Yeah.
Move in on the first date. No, but I feel it's just a beautiful example of like what love is, and the fact that it's these two brilliant writresses, that's such a terrible word, writers, they are writers, expressing themselves to each other so consistently over years and years and years. And they always have this love between them, even when they're not in the throes of their relationship anymore. I don't know. I think it's a beautiful example.
Absolutely. And you know what really strikes me about it as well? It was one of the last throws before World War II. The World War I was the death knell of the aristocracy, but I think World War II really was the death knell of that entire world.
Oh, yeah. And
there's not a lot of people around these days that have that kind of like, it's sad to say they had so much privilege. These women had, let's face it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Especially Vita.
And they didn't have middle class morality that I think is rammed down the throat of a lot of modern society. So even though we have like the gay rights movement, the LGBT community, and we've all fought so hard for where we are today, there's a certain kind of like non-conformity that's lost with, especially when you look at Vita and Virginia's relationship, because they never really tried to label it. They just let it ebb and flow and live and drift and come back. I mean, how unique and to that time, and how special that, and to have an insight into that from us looking back from where we are now, I think is very important and rare.
I agree.
That's what I think I've learned from this entire thing.
I agree. And that's the reason I think historical homos before gay liberation are so interesting, because they reveal that side of gayness before it was so tightly categorized.
Yeah.
And before everyone was like, gender is this and gender is not this and sexuality is this. And it's like, they just didn't care about gender or sexuality. They just did whatever the fuck they wanted. I think we could learn a little bit something from that.
Why don't we leave it at that? What a beautiful way to leave it. Thank you, Bash, and thank you.
Hey, thank you,
Virginia Woolf, and thank you, Vita Sackville-West, for just being fucking bad bitches.
Yeah.
That's a wrap on today's episode of Historical Homos.
Like, subscribe, leave a 5-star fucking review, baby, because we're going to give you so much more content. We're coming straight into your ears. Follow us at historical.homos on Instagram.
Booyakasha. Keep being gay. Love ya.